I wake up every morning to the mechanical beeping of life support equipment. My back aches from a night in the hospital chair, but I can't bring myself to go home. Benjamin looks worse every day. His once sturdy body now resembles a dried up branch under the hospital sheet. I take his hand skin and bones, covered in age spots and bruises from the IVs. "Good morning, Ben," I whisper, though I know he can hardly hear me. The doctors say the coma is deep. Our history with Benjamin Hampton spans 43 years of marriage. We met in Grand Junction when I was 24 and he was 31. He taught history at a local college and I worked for the town's social services department. Now I'm retired and Ben is dying of pancreatic cancer, discovered too late. "Mrs. Hampton, you need to eat." Adrian, the nurse, peeks into the room with a tray. "I brought you some breakfast from the cafeteria." "Thanks, honey, but I'm not hungry." "You've been saying that every morning for 2 weeks. The professor wouldn't approve of you starving yourself." He puts the tray on the nightstand next to my bag. "I'll leave it here. Please eat something." As he walks away, I look at my hands, wrinkled with protruding veins. 67 isn't that old, but the last few months have aged me more than the previous 10 years. I force myself to eat half of the cold toast and take a sip of the cold coffee. My thoughts return to our daughter Audrey. She's supposed to arrive today. At least that's what she promised on the phone 3 days ago. I haven't seen her since Ben was admitted to the hospital 2 months ago. "Work, kids? You know, Mom." Her voice on the phone always sounds busy, like she's doing me a favor by carving minutes out of her busy schedule for me. Audrey has always been Daddy's little girl. Benjamin adored her from the minute he held her in his arms at the birth center. "My princess," he called her, even when she wiped snot on his expensive tweed jackets or drew on the pages of rare books in his collection with a pen. I tried to be stricter, to set boundaries, but Ben only waved it off. "Ruth, she's a child." Let her enjoy her childhood. Gradually, Audrey learned to exploit her father's weakness. By adolescence, she had already masterfully manipulated him, begging for money, expensive clothes, trips, and when things went wrong, I became the main enemy, the evil stepmother who does not let her live. Daddy allows everything, but you always spoil the fun. I remember when she wrecked our car at 16, taking it for a ride with her friends without asking. Ben didn't even punish her. Instead, he bought her her own car a month later. "It's for her safety, Ruth. It's better to let her drive a reliable car." I close my eyes, and my memory takes me back to the day Audrey announced she was dropping out of college after her first semester. We were sitting around the dining room table at our house on Orchard Avenue, the spacious 2-story building with a veranda that we'd bought when Ben got the department chair position. "It's just not for me," she said, picking at the roast with her fork. "I want to travel, explore the world. Studying can wait." "But honey," Ben began, "your education." "Daddy, you always said life is the best teacher." She gave me a triumphant look, knowing she was using his own words against him. I couldn't take it anymore. "Audrey, we pay $20,000 a year for your tuition. You can't just quit." "Oh, Mom, you always make everything about money." She rolled her eyes. "I'll find myself, start a career without all this academic nonsense." Of course, Ben backed her up. "Ruth, maybe she's right. When I was her age, I didn't know what I wanted either." And, of course, we continued to support her while she found herself, changing cities, boyfriends, and hobbies like gloves. The sound of the ward door opening pulls me out of my memories. But it's not Audrey, just Dr. Pierce on his morning rounds. "How's he doing today?" I ask, though the answer is obvious. "He's in stable condition, Mrs. Hampton." The doctor checks his vitals and makes notes on his clipboard. Her liver function continues to deteriorate. We've increased her pain medication. What can he tell us? Benjamin's dying. The metastasis has spread throughout his body. It's only a matter of time. You should go home, get some rest, says Dr. Pierce. Let your daughter be with him. She's not here yet, I reply, and there's a bitterness in my voice that I try to hold back. Oh, the doctor shifts uncomfortably from foot to foot. Well, when she gets here, you need to save your strength, Ruth. When he leaves, I take my husband's hand again. Remember, Ben, when Audrey married Neil? I say quietly. You insisted that we pay for the whole wedding, even though Neil's parents were much wealthier than we were. That wedding cost us the money we'd been saving for the roof and a new heating system. We had to tighten our belts for 2 years, but Audrey wanted the wedding of her dreams, and Ben couldn't say no. And remember when we helped them with the down payment on the house? I continue my monologue into the void. You gave away almost all of our savings. Neil worked as a broker and was always talking about some promising investment, but for some reason they needed our money for their own house. It's our grandchildren who will grow up in this house, Ruth, Ben urged me. Lillian and Hugh, our twin grandchildren, are now teenagers. We see them rarely, only on major holidays, and even then not every year. My phone rings, interrupting the flow of memories, an unfamiliar number with a local area code. Mrs. Hampton? A formal male voice asks. This is Vincent Holloway from the First National Bank of Grand Junction. We've been trying to reach you for several days now. Yes, that's me, I answer tiredly. What can I do for you? It's about your mortgage and the recent changes to your property status. We need to meet in person to discuss some details. What time would be convenient for you? I shake my head, trying to focus. I'm sorry, Mr. Holloway, but this isn't a good time. My husband is in the hospital, in critical condition. Oh, I'm so sorry, he said with genuine sympathy. But the question is rather urgent. Perhaps your daughter, Mrs. Frostwick, could— My daughter? I interrupt. What does my daughter have to do with this? Well, since she initiated the refinancing process and is a co-applicant— Refinancing? I feel a chill go down my spine. There must be some kind of misunderstanding. We didn't apply for a refinance. There's a pause on the other end of the line. Mrs. Hampton, we have documents with your signature dated last month. Your daughter submitted them along with a power of attorney. I'm sorry. I interrupt him again, nausea rising in my throat. I can't discuss this right now. I'll call you back later. I disconnect without waiting for an answer. My head is ringing. Power of attorney? Oh yeah, I signed it 8 months ago when Audrey offered to help with house payments and bills while Ben and I focus on treatment. But refinancing? A co-signer? The beeping of the heart monitor brings me back to reality. Now is not the time to think about that. Ben is more important. All this banking stuff will have to wait. I tuck my phone into my bag and take my husband's hand again. His fingers twitch slightly. It happens sometimes. The doctor says it's just a reflex, not a sign of consciousness. Ben, I whisper, leaning in close to his ear. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Outside my room window, the September sun is painting the mountains of Colorado a golden hue. 43 years ago, on a similarly balmy fall day, Ben asked me out for the first time, a picnic in Colorado National Park. He read Whitman poetry to me and served me homemade cider from a flask. I fell in love with his laugh and the way the wind played with his brown hair. The door opens again, and this time Audrey appears on the doorstep. Even here in the hospital, she looks impeccable. Cashmere cardigan, perfectly styled blonde hair, expensive watch on her wrist. She looks more like me than Ben, the same blue eyes, the same cut of her lips. But she's like her father, especially his stubbornness and idealism. Only without his kindness and honesty. Mom, she takes a step into the room. her gaze sliding over my father's figure and quickly back to me. You look terrible. Hello, Audrey. I don't move from my seat. It's nice to finally see you. She wrinkles her nose at my tone. I came as soon as I could. Lillian had an important tennis competition, and Neil had a conference in Phoenix. Of course, I nod. Your father's been dying for 2 months now, but tennis is clearly more important. Don't start. She walks over to the bed and gently touches my father's arm. How is he? Dying, I answer simply. She shudders. Doctors say anything? How long do they have left? Days, hours maybe. Audrey pulls an immaculately clean handkerchief from her purse and wipes her eyes, though I can't see any tears in them. Mom, you need to go home. Take a shower, change your clothes, get a good night's sleep. I'll stay with Daddy. Maybe she's right. I haven't left the hospital in 3 days, and my clothes are starting to smell like antiseptic and hospital food. Okay, I agree, gathering my things. I'll be back in a couple hours. Take your time, she says, settling into the chair I've just vacated. Dad wouldn't want you to wear yourself out. I freeze in the doorway, looking at my daughter and my dying husband. Something in her words sounds fake, but I'm too tired to analyze. Or maybe I'm just used to Audrey's slight whiff of insincerity. By the way, I say, remembering the call from the bank, do you know anything about refinancing our house? Audrey looks up at me, and for a moment something akin to panic flashes in her eyes. But she quickly pulls herself together. Oh, that. Yeah, I've been meaning to talk to you about it. I was just picking the right moment. Don't worry, I'll explain everything when you get back. You need to rest now. Her tone is too casual, too soothing. I can feel the anxiety building inside, but physical exhaustion takes over. Okay, I say. I'll talk to you later. As I leave the hospital, I glance at my phone. Maybe I should call Mr. Holloway back right now. But no, first a shower and at least an hour's sleep in a proper bed. And then I'll deal with this weird refinancing thing. As I get into the cab, I cast one last glance at Ben's third-floor room window. 43 years together, and this is how it ends. In a sterile hospital room, with machines beeping, with a daughter who can't get off the phone even at her dying father's bedside. I see her already pulling it out of her purse, barely out the door. Where are we going? The cab driver asks. Orchard Avenue, 238. I answer and lean back in the seat, closing my eyes. Home. At least for a little while. Benjamin died 3 days after Audrey's visit. I was next to him, holding his hand, when the line on the monitor turned into a flat line. There were no last words, no dramatic sighs or sudden awakenings, just a quiet exhalation, an almost imperceptible transition from still alive to not anymore. The nurse entered the room a minute after the alarm went off. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Hampton, she said, turning off the beeping device. I nodded, not letting go of Ben's hand. Strangely, there were no tears, just emptiness and fatigue after 2 months of constant tension, sleepless nights, and prayers turned to nothing. Would you like me to call someone? The nurse asked. Your daughter? I'll call her myself, I answered, though what I really wanted was a few more minutes of silence, the last few minutes alone with the person I had lived with most of my life. When I did dial Audrey's number, she didn't answer. I left a message. Audrey, Daddy died. Call me as soon as you can. She called back 3 hours later. By then, I'd filled out the paperwork and talked to the hospital coordinator about transferring the body to the funeral home. Mom? Her voice sounded like I woke her up. It was almost 4 o'clock in the afternoon. What happened? Daddy died, I repeated, standing in the hospital hallway. Today, around noon. Oh my God. She was quiet. Yeah, I didn't think it would happen so soon. I mean, we'd only just seen each other. Yeah, I said simply. I'll be there. She hesitated. Tomorrow. I need to organize with the kids and Neil. Have you contacted the funeral home yet? Yes, it's all in process. Good. She stopped talking again. I'm so sorry, Mom. I didn't know what to say to her. Sorry? I was sorry, too. Sorry that Ben had suffered these months. Sorry that our daughter hadn't taken the time to be there for her dying father, who had always put her first. Come back when you can, I said instead. The next few days passed in a kind of haze. I picked out a casket, discussed the details of the ceremony, called Ben's college co-workers and our few friends. Most of our peers had already died or moved closer to their children in other cities. Audrey arrived the next day as promised, but stayed at the hotel rather than our house. There are too many memories in your house, Mom, she explained. It would be too hard for me to sleep in my old room. I didn't argue, though I remembered how she had insisted just 3 days ago that I go home to rest. But perhaps her grief was manifesting itself differently than mine. Neil and the kids weren't due until the funeral, which we'd scheduled for Saturday, 5 days after Ben's death. Hugh has an important school project, and Lillian can't miss tennis practice, Audrey explained, as if those reasons were good enough for not coming to Grandpa's funeral sooner. On the eve of the funeral, I came home for the first time in a long time with the intention of staying over. There was no more reason to spend the night at the hospital. There was no more Ben for whom I was there. Our house greeted me with silence. I turned on the hallway light and paused, feeling strangely alienated from those familiar walls. For 40 years, Ben and I had lived here, and now every corner held his ghost. His tattered slippers still stood by the couch. An unread book lay on the bedside table with a bookmark on page 127. I went into his study, a small room filled with bookshelves. This is where Ben spent his evenings, preparing for lectures even after retirement. He advised graduate students, wrote articles for historical journals. I never ventured in here after he was admitted to the hospital. It was as long as this room remained untouched, there was still hope that he would return. The desk was piled with papers, as always. Ben had never been neat. Creative clutter, he called it. I walked over to the desk and ran my hand over the old oak surface. We'd bought this table at an antique sale the first year we lived in this house. Ben fell in love with it at first sight, even though it was expensive for our budget at the time. I started going through the papers, not knowing exactly what I was looking for. Maybe some kind of message from him? Something that would help me get through this emptiness that was growing inside of me. Among the stack of bills and printouts of research papers, I noticed a thick brown envelope with the logo of the law firm, Brooks, Kingsley and Associates. It was sealed and had Ben's name on it. I turned the envelope over. On the back was an inscription in Ben's handwriting, to be opened in the event of my death. For Ruth only. My heart beat faster. What was it? A will? But we already had a simple joint will made years ago. Everything we owned was to go to me, and when I died, to Audrey. I sat down in Ben's chair, still holding the envelope in my hands. I should have opened it now, but something was stopping me. Fear? A premonition? I didn't know. Either way, I didn't have the energy to deal with it today, on the eve of the funeral. I put the envelope in the top drawer of my desk and locked it. Later, I thought, there would be time to deal with all this after the funeral. Back in the bedroom, I lay on our bed, my bed now, and stared up at the ceiling. For the first time in many days, I cried. The morning of the day of the funeral was unexpectedly clear and warm for late September. I wore the black dress I'd bought years ago for Ben's sister's funeral. It hung on me. I'd lost a lot of weight in the last few weeks. Audrey was supposed to pick me up at 10 in the morning, but she called at 9:45. Mom, we're running a little late. Lillian's not feeling well, and Neil's still fiddling with his tie. Can you drive yourself? I don't have a car, Audrey, I reminded him. Ben hadn't been able to drive for the last few months, and I'd sold mine to pay some of his medical bills. Oh, she paused. Well, then we'll try to get there as soon as possible. Just don't get mad, okay? I didn't answer. Instead, I hailed a cab and drove to the church by myself. It was strange to arrive at my own husband's funeral alone, but it seemed an apt metaphor for how I'd felt the last few days, alone in the middle of a crowd of well-wishers. The church was slowly filling up. Ben's college colleagues, former students, neighbors, everyone came up to me, offering condolences, sharing memories of Ben. I nodded, thanked, sometimes even smiled, but I felt like I was watching from the sidelines. Audrey and her family showed up 5 minutes before the service started. They entered the church as a united front, Audrey in front, Neil behind her with his tie perfectly tied, the twins behind, with equally bored expressions on their faces. Sorry I'm late, Mom. Audrey leaned over to kiss my cheek. She smelled of expensive perfume and the faint scent of wine. 10 o'clock in the morning? The traffic was awful. I remained silent. She sat down next to me, Neil and the kids on the other side of her. Niall nodded at me, but didn't say a word. We'd never particularly gotten along. Ben thought of him as an ambitious young man with a great future. I saw him as a narcissistic careerist who had married Audrey partly because of Ben's connections in academia. The service went by like a blur. The minister spoke about Ben's life, his contributions to education, his love for his family. Several colleagues gave short speeches. Audrey said a few words, too, touching, well-chosen, but sounding like she was talking about someone she didn't know, not the father who had idolized her all her life. After church, there was a reception at a nearby restaurant. I sat at the head table, accepting condolences and nodding in response to memories of Ben. Audrey sat next to me, but was more preoccupied with her cell phone than talking to the guests. Is everything okay? I asked when she checked her messages for the third time in 5 minutes. Yeah, just work stuff. She quickly put her phone away. Neil is waiting for news on a big deal. I glanced over at her husband, who was standing at the bar, engrossed in a conversation with one of Ben's former grad students. He didn't look like a man expecting big news. On a day like this, I couldn't help myself. At your father's funeral? Audrey rolled her eyes. Mom, the world doesn't stop just because someone died. We have obligations, bills to pay. Something in her tone made me wary. Are you in financial trouble, Audrey? She tensed. Why would you say that? You just said something about bills, and that call from the bank a few days ago about refinancing our house. Not now, Mom. She pulled out her phone again. We'll talk about it later. I wanted to insist, but an older couple, old friends of Ben's from university, approached us and the conversation broke off. Near the end of the reception, I noticed Neil and Audrey arguing intensely in the corner of the room. Audrey looked upset. Neil looked annoyed. He waved her off and headed for the exit, checking his watch as he went. Audrey stood alone, clutching her wine glass so hard her knuckles turned white. I walked over to her. What's wrong? Neil has to leave. She took a big sip of wine. Urgent business at the office. Saturday? The investment business never sleeps, Mom. She finished her wine in one gulp. He apologizes that he can't stay until the end. And the kids? I looked around for the twins. They're going with him. Lillian has a tennis tournament tomorrow, and Hugh has a test to study for. I looked at my daughter, trying to figure out what was going on behind this facade of excuses. What about you? I'll stay with you. She sighed, like she was doing me a huge favor. At least for a couple days. You shouldn't be alone right now. Her words should have moved me, but instead I felt strangely irritated. Where was this concern when Ben was dying? When I'd sat by his bedside nights, not knowing if he'd live to see the morning? Don't, I said. You have your own life, Your own responsibilities. I can manage. Don't be silly, Mom. She put her hand on my shoulder. I'll stay. To my surprise, she did stay. After Neil took the kids away, Audrey came home with me. She took a small bag into her old room and went down to the kitchen where I was making tea. God, nothing has changed here, she said, looking around the kitchen. Dash. Same wallpaper, same curtains. How old are they? 20 years? 15? I answered. Your father and I didn't see the point in changing something that was still in good working order. She chuckled. You've always been so frugal. There was something like contempt in her voice, and I felt anger rising in me. Yeah, we were frugal. Because your college cost thousands of dollars, because your wedding cost us a fortune, because the down payment on your house. I stopped when I saw the look on her face. You always bring that up to me, she said quietly, as if I should feel guilty that you decided to help me. We didn't just decide to help, Audrey. We gave almost all of our savings to your education, to your wedding, to your house. And now that your father is dead, you couldn't even get here in time for his funeral. She blushed. I explained. We had problems with the children, with— There's nothing wrong with the kids, I interrupted. They handled the trip here and back the same day just fine. And Neil's fine too, since he was able to leave in the middle of his father-in-law's wake. Audrey turned away. I don't want to fight, Mom. Not today. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. She was right. The day had been hard enough without this altercation. I'm sorry, I said. I'm just tired and frustrated. She nodded, but didn't look at me. Tea? I offered, changing the subject. No, thank you. I think I'm gonna go lie down. It had been a long day. She went upstairs, and I stayed in the kitchen, thinking about the oddity of her behavior. Something was going on, something she didn't want to talk about. That call from the bank, the tense conversation with Neil, her nervousness. I decided it was time to take a look at the contents of that envelope. Maybe there'd be some answers in there. I went up to Ben's office and opened the desk drawer. The envelope was where I'd left it. For Ruth only, it said. I opened the envelope and pulled out several folded sheets of paper. The first was a handwritten sheet, a letter from Ben, dated 3 months earlier, shortly after his diagnosis. My dear Ruth, he wrote in his neat professor's handwriting. If you are reading this, it means I am gone. I am sorry to leave you so soon. Our 40-plus years together were the greatest happiness of my life. I stopped, feeling tears come to my throat. His voice, his words, so much like him, always thinking of everyone but himself. I continued reading. There's something I need to tell you. I've never been a good liar, especially with you. But for the past few years, I've been hiding some things to protect you and our family. Now that I'm gone, you need to know the truth. I turned the page, not knowing what to expect. What could Ben be hiding from me? It's about our daughter and her husband. A few years ago, Neil got into serious financial trouble. His investment firm took a big loss, and he was on the verge of bankruptcy. Audrey came to me for help, begging me not to tell you. She knew how you felt about Neil and his financial ventures. I agreed to help them using the money we were saving for our old age. I transferred a substantial sum into Neil's account, hoping it would help them get back on their feet. But the problems were deeper than I thought. I stopped reading, unable to believe my eyes. Ben had given away our savings? Without my knowledge? To save Neil from bankruptcy? That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I quickly folded the papers back into the envelope and tucked it away in a drawer. The door to the office opened, and Audrey appeared on the doorstep. Mom, what are you doing here? Just, sorting through your father's things, I lied, surprised at how easily the lie fell from my lips. She glanced at the table, then at me, and suspicion flickered in her gaze. isn't it a little early for this? Dad was just buried today. I need something to do, I replied. It helps me not to think. The emptiness. Her eyes softened. I understand. Just don't overwork yourself. I won't. I got up from the table. Did you want something? Yes, she paused. We need to talk about the house. The house? Yeah, about your house, about refinancing. I waited for her to continue, remembering Ben's words from the letter. What else was my daughter hiding from me? How about tomorrow? I suggested tomorrow. Today had been a rough day. Audrey nodded with obvious relief. Sure, tomorrow. Get some rest, Mom. She left, and I was left standing in the middle of the office that still held Ben's presence. What else didn't I know? What else was in that letter? And most importantly, what was happening to our house? I decided to put off reading the rest of the letter until morning. I needed time to digest what I had already read. Ben, my honest, straightforward Ben, was hiding financial decisions from me, giving away our savings behind my back. And now Audrey wanted to talk about the house, about the refinance she'd arranged by power of attorney while I sat at my dying husband's bedside. Something told me that tomorrow would be a difficult conversation, and that the envelope hidden in Ben's desk contained answers that could turn my life around. I woke up early the next morning to a house that was suddenly too big and empty. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the mountains in pinkish tones. Ben had always loved this time of day, the quiet, the freshness, the promise of a new beginning. How many times had I caught him standing at the window with a cup of coffee, admiring the view? Last night I never finished reading the letter. Something was stopping me. Maybe fear of knowing the whole truth, or a reluctance to part with the image of the Ben I'd known for 43 years. The man who never lied to me, never hid important things. I climbed out of bed, threw on a robe, and walked down to the kitchen. The house was quiet. Audrey was probably still asleep. I put the kettle on and took out the envelope I'd brought from the study last night while Audrey was taking a shower. The continuation of Ben's letter was just as neat, uncorrected, as if he knew exactly what he wanted to say. I had hoped that this would be a temporary measure, that Neil would be able to fix his affairs and get his money back. But instead, he kept investing in risky projects that didn't pay off. Audrey came to me again and again, always with new excuses, always with promises that this was the last time. I realized too late that I had become complicit in their irresponsibility. By the time I refused to give more money, much of our savings had already been lost. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to be as disappointed in our daughter as I was, and because I was ashamed of my weakness. But there is good news, Ruth. I'm not the simpleton our daughter and her husband think I am. A few years ago, when I inherited from my Uncle Harold, I didn't put all the money into our joint account as I told you. I invested part of the amount, a substantial part, through my old friend Edward Price, the lawyer you met at faculty parties. This investment has been successful and over the years has grown into a sum that should provide you with a comfortable life. Edward manages these funds through a trust fund that only he and I know about. Neither Audrey nor Neil know of its existence. Call Edward as soon as you read this letter. He will explain all the details and help you access these funds. His contact information is attached. There is something else you should know. I am very concerned that Audrey and Neil may try to gain control of our home after my death. Their financial situation is much worse than they will admit, so I've secretly changed the terms of our will. The house is now entirely yours, not a joint estate as we originally agreed. Edward also has a copy of the new will. Forgive me for all this, my love. I should have been more honest with you. I hope you realize that I was trying to protect you, both from pain and financial problems. Always yours, Benjamin. I set the letter aside, feeling my heart pounding somewhere in my throat. Ben had been lying to me all this time. hiding Audrey and Neil's financial problems, giving away our savings behind my back. But he'd also secretly protected me by setting up a trust fund that no one knew about. I pulled Edward Price's business card out of the envelope. I vaguely remembered the man, a tall, thin man with a neatly trimmed gray beard. Ben had dined with him occasionally, but I'd never suspected they had any financial dealings. My gaze fell to the clock, 7:30 in the morning, too early to call a lawyer, but I couldn't sit idly by. I decided to look through the rest of the papers in the envelope. There were a few more papers, a copy of Ben's new will, which did indeed state that the house and all the assets would pass solely to me. Trust fund statements showing an impressive amount, almost $800,000, and a letter from the bank, dated a month earlier, warning me and Audrey of a possible mortgage default. Mortgage default? But we'd paid off our loan 15 years ago. The house was all ours. What's going on? The sound of footsteps on the stairs made me quickly fold all the papers back into the envelope and stash it in my robe pocket. Audrey walked into the kitchen, dressed in an expensive silk robe. "Good morning, Mom," she said, suppressing a yawn. "You're early." "I'm always up early," I replied, trying to make my voice sound normal. "Would you like some coffee?" "I'd love some." She sat down at the table. "How are you feeling today?" "Fine, considering the circumstances." I put the cup in front of her. "You wanted to talk about the house yesterday." She was a little tense, but she pulled herself together quickly. "Yeah, right. But why don't we have breakfast first?" "No." I sat down across from her. "I want to know what's going on, Audrey. Now." She sipped her coffee, clearly delaying the moment. "Okay," she said finally. "Remember the power of attorney you signed a few months ago? So I could help with the payments while you and Dad were taking care of him?" "I remember." I tried to stay calm, even though my heart was racing. "Well, I used it to, optimize some of your financial issues." "Optimize?" I could feel my anger rising. "What exactly were you optimizing, Audrey?" She ran her hand through her hair, a gesture that had always made her nervous since she was a child. "I took out a mortgage on this house." "You what?" I couldn't believe my ears. "But the house is already paid off. Your father and I closed on the mortgage 15 years ago." "I know, Mom." She looked into her cup, avoiding my gaze. "But that's the advantage. There are so many frozen assets in the house. It's worth almost $1 million in current prices. And you've decided to unfreeze those assets?" I tried to control myself, but my voice was still shaking. "Without my knowledge? While I was sitting by my dying husband's bedside?" "Look," she finally looked up. "It was necessary. Neil and I had some financial difficulties. Temporary, of course, but we urgently needed funds to cover some debts. So instead of asking for honest help, you decided to put a mortgage on my house? I tried." She raised her voice. "I've been asking my dad for years, and he helped as long as he could. But then, all of a sudden, he said no. He said he wouldn't give me another dime. It was so unlike him. I remembered Ben's letter, so he finally found the strength to say no to her. Too late, but still." "So you decided to take what he didn't want to give." "I decided to do what he would have done if he'd been sane." She jumped up from her chair. "Dad's always helped us, always been there for us. It was only in the last few months, when his illness clouded his judgment." "Don't you dare," I interrupted her icily. "Don't you dare justify your theft by accusing your father of dementia. He was sane until his last day." She opened her mouth to object, but changed her mind. Instead, she took a deep breath and sat down again. "Look, Mom, what's done is done. I took out a mortgage. The money's already spent. But it's not a big deal. You don't have to worry about the payments. Neil and I will make them." "Really?" I wasn't being sarcastic. "How generous of you to pay for a loan you took out yourself." It's not just that, she continued, as if she hadn't noticed my tone. Think about it, Mom. Why do you need such a big house now that Dad's gone? There are 5 bedrooms, and you're alone. The upkeep, the taxes, the utilities, all of that will be beyond your means on your pension. So what do you suggest? She perked up, apparently thinking I was starting to agree with her arguments. Sell the house. The real estate market in Grand Junction is booming. We'll pay off the mortgage and we'll split the balance, which will be substantial. You'll have enough for a small apartment and a comfortable life, and we'll have enough to take care of our problems and educate our children. Split it? I couldn't believe my ears. You want me to sell the house I've lived in for 40 years and give you part of the money? Not to me, but to my grandchildren, she corrected, for their education. Isn't that what Dad would have wanted? I was struck by the ease with which she manipulated Ben's memory, tailoring his supposed wishes to suit her own needs. And if I say no? Her face darkened slightly. Mom, be reasonable. You won't be able to pay the mortgage on your own. Your pension is barely enough for food and medicine. So you cornered me on purpose. I was stating a fact, not asking. You took out a mortgage I can't pay to force me to sell the house. I've created a situation that benefits everyone. She shrugged. You don't need a house that big. You've said yourself more than once that you're tired of cleaning it. You don't need it anymore. Her words sounded like a sentence I had to accept without complaint. I looked at my daughter and didn't recognize her. Where was the little girl who used to draw me birthday cards? Who cried when she broke her knees and ran to me for comfort? At what point did she turn into this cold, calculating woman willing to cheat on her own mother? I got up from the table and walked silently out of the kitchen. Audrey called out to me, but I didn't turn around. I went up to the bedroom, got dressed, and pulled a small travel bag out of the closet, the same one I'd taken to the hospital to see Ben. I put a few changes of clothes, toiletries, and medications in it. Then I added an envelope of papers, a framed picture of Ben and me, and his old watch, which was always on the bedside table. When I came downstairs with the bag in my hand, Audrey was standing in the hallway with her arms crossed over her chest. Where are you going? Leaving, I said simply. What? Where? She looked genuinely surprised, as if she couldn't believe I was capable of making my own decisions. It's none of your business. I headed for the door. Mom, don't be silly. She blocked my path. Where are you going to go? You don't have money. You don't have a car. I have everything I need. I looked her straight in the eye. And soon you'll have nothing. What do you mean? Her self-confidence was starting to turn to worry. I picked up my bag and said calmly, Then don't complain, because tomorrow you'll find out that your father changed his will. The house belongs only to me, not to both of us, as you thought, and he left me assets you don't even know about. He also told me all about your schemes and how you've been bilking him out of money for years. It's all documented by his lawyer, who I'm meeting with today. Audrey turned pale, her lips quivering. You're lying. Daddy couldn't. He could and he did. I stepped around her and opened the front door. The power of attorney you so shamelessly used will be revoked today, and your mortgage scam is fraud, Audrey, a felony. What do you think Neil's firm will say when they find out? You wouldn't dare. Her voice was barely audible. We're family? Family? I grinned bitterly. You stopped being my family the moment you decided to steal from me while I sat by my dying husband's bedside. You had 43 years to learn integrity from your father. Instead, you inherited only his weakness for you. Mom, please. She took a step toward me, tears finally appearing in her eyes. Let's talk. I'll explain everything. Explain what? How you and Neil squandered all the money your father gave you over the years? How you used my trust to put a mortgage on my house? How you lied to my face the whole time? I shook my head. No, Audrey, You'll have to explain in court if it comes to that. You can't do this to your own daughter. She sounded hysterical. After everything Neil and I have done for you. What did you do, Audrey? I turned to her at the door. Come for Christmas every 2 years. Called once a month for 5 minutes. Or are you talking about the 2 days you spent in the hospital with your father during the 2 months of his agony? She opened her mouth but couldn't come up with an answer. Goodbye, Audrey, I said as I walked out the door. My lawyer will contact you. You're going to regret this, she shouted after me as I walked down the path to the gate. You're an old, sick woman. You won't survive without our help. I didn't turn around. For the first time in years, I felt not pain or disappointment, but pure, crystallized rage. Fury gave me the strength to go forward without looking back. On the street, I pulled out my cell phone and hailed a cab, then dialed the number on Edward Price's business card. Attorney Price's office, how may I help you? A woman's voice answered. My name is Ruth Hampton, I said. I need to see Mr. Price right away. It's about a trust fund set up by my late husband, Benjamin Hampton. Just a moment, Mrs. Hampton. I heard the keys bang. Yes, Mr. Price was expecting your call. He can see you at 11 o'clock this morning. Would that be all right with you? Quite all right, I said, as I saw a cab pull up in front of the house. I'll be there at 11. I got into the car, gave the address of a small hotel in the center of town, and leaned back in the seat. Only now, as the adrenaline began to subside, did I realize how tired I was. But this fatigue was different, not exhausting, but almost pleasant, like after a hard but necessary job. I didn't know what lay ahead. I didn't know if I could regain control of the house, cancel that unfortunate mortgage, hold Audrey accountable for what she'd done. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like my life belonged to me again. The cab turned onto the main street, taking me away from the house where most of my life had been spent. I didn't look back. The past was behind me, and the future, however uncertain, was ahead of me. And in that future, I would make my own decisions, not go with the flow as I had done for too long. I woke up early in the morning in a house that was suddenly too big and empty. The sun was just starting to rise, coloring the mountains pinkish. Ben had always loved this time of day, the quiet, the freshness, the promise of a new beginning. How many times had I caught him standing at the window with a cup of coffee, admiring the view? Last night, I never finished reading the letter. Something was stopping me. Maybe fear of knowing the whole truth, or a reluctance to part with the image of the Ben I'd known for 43 years, the man who never lied to me, never hid important things. I climbed out of bed, threw on a robe, and walked down to the kitchen. The house was quiet. Audrey was probably still asleep. I put the kettle on and took out the envelope I'd brought from the study last night while Audrey was taking a shower. The continuation of Ben's letter was just as neat, uncorrected, as if he knew exactly what he wanted to say. I had hoped that this would be a temporary measure, that Neil would be able to fix his affairs and get his money back. But instead, he kept investing in risky projects that didn't pay off. Audrey came to me again and again, always with new excuses, always with promises that this was the last time. I realized too late that I had become complicit in their irresponsibility. By the time I refused to give more money, much of our savings had already been lost. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to be as disappointed in our daughter as I was, and because I was ashamed of my weakness. But there is good news, Ruth. I'm not the simpleton our daughter and her husband think I am. A few years ago, when I inherited from my Uncle Harold, I didn't put all the money into our joint account as I told you. I invested part of the amount, a substantial part, through my old friend Edward Price, the lawyer you met at faculty parties. This investment has been successful and over the years has grown into a sum that should provide you with a comfortable life. Edward manages these funds through a trust fund that only he and I know about. Neither Audrey nor Neil know of its existence. Call Edward as soon as you read this letter. He will explain all the details and help you access these funds. His contact information is attached. There is something else you should know. I am very concerned that Audrey and Neil may try to gain control of our home after my death. Their financial situation is much worse than they will admit. So I've secretly changed the terms of our will. The house is now entirely yours, not a joint estate as we originally agreed. Edward also has a copy of the new will. Forgive me for all this, my love. I should have been more honest with you. I hope you realize that I was trying to protect you, both from pain and financial problems. Always yours, Benjamin. I set the letter aside, feeling my heart pounding somewhere in my throat. Ben had been lying to me all this time, hiding Audrey and Neil's financial problems, giving away our savings behind my back. But he'd also secretly protected me by setting up a trust fund that no one knew about. I pulled Edward Price's business card out of the envelope. I vaguely remembered the man, a tall, lean man, with a neatly trimmed gray beard. Ben had dined with him occasionally, but I'd never suspected they had any financial dealings. My gaze fell to the clock, 7:30 in the morning. Too early to call a lawyer, but I couldn't sit idly by. I decided to look through the rest of the papers in the envelope. There were a few more papers, a copy of Ben's new will, which did indeed state that the house and all the assets would pass solely to me. Trust fund statements showing an impressive amount, almost $800,000, and a letter from the bank dated a month earlier, warning me and Audrey of a possible mortgage default. Mortgage default? But we'd paid off our loan 15 years ago. The house was all ours. What's going on? The sound of footsteps on the stairs made me quickly fold all the papers back into the envelope and stash it in my robe pocket. Audrey walked into the kitchen, dressed in an expensive silk robe. "Good morning, Mom," she said, suppressing a yawn. "You're early." "I'm always up early," I replied, trying to make my voice sound normal. "Would you like some coffee?" "I'd love some." She sat down at the table. "How are you feeling today?" "Fine, considering the circumstances." I put the cup in front of her. "You wanted to talk about the house yesterday." She was a little tense, but she pulled herself together quickly. "Yeah, right. But why don't we have breakfast first?" "No," I sat down across from her. "I want to know what's going on, Audrey. Now." She sipped her coffee, clearly delaying the moment. "Okay," she finally said. "Remember the power of attorney you signed a few months ago? So I could help with the payments while you and Dad were taking care of him?" "I remember." I tried to stay calm, even though my heart was racing. "Well, I used it to, optimize some of your financial issues." "Optimize?" I could feel my anger rising. "What exactly were you optimizing, Audrey?" She ran her hand through her hair, a gesture that had always made her nervous since she was a child. "I took out a mortgage on this house." "You what?" I couldn't believe my ears. "But the house is already paid off. Your father and I closed on the mortgage 15 years ago." "I know, Mom." She looked into her cup, avoiding my gaze. "But that's the advantage. There are so many frozen assets in the house. It's worth almost $1 million in current prices. And you've decided to unfreeze those assets?" I tried to control myself, but my voice was still shaking. "Without my knowledge? While I was sitting by my dying husband's bedside?" "Look," she finally looked up. "It was necessary. Neil and I had some financial difficulties. Temporary, of course, but we urgently needed funds to cover some debts. I decided it was time to act. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and said, 'I have to go. I have a meeting.'" "A meeting? With who?" Audrey looked confused. "Your father's lawyer," I answered calmly. "Edward Price." Her face changed, first bewilderment, then shock, then fear. Why? Her voice sounded tense. You'll find out. I headed for the door. Mom, wait. She followed me. Let's talk. I'll explain everything. It's too late for explanations, Audrey. I turned around. I know enough. I left the house, got into the cab I'd called, and drove to Edward Price's office. The office was in an old brick building on Main Street. A modest sign on the door read, Price and Associates, Legal Services. I went up to the second floor and entered the reception area, where a young woman with a welcoming smile sat behind a desk. Mrs. Hampton? She asked when I introduced myself. Mr. Price is expecting you. Please come in. She led me down a short hallway to an oak door and knocked. Ruth, come in. Edward Price's voice sounded warm and confident. I remembered him vaguely. We'd seen him a few times at university events, but never really socialized. He was about Ben's age, maybe a little older, about 70, with a neatly trimmed gray beard and shrewd blue eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, I said, shaking his outstretched hand. You're welcome. He gestured for me to take a seat in the leather chair across from his desk. Ben had warned me that you might come by after gone. My sincere condolences, Ruth. Ben was a good man and my friend for many years. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Something in his sincere sympathy made me feel Ben's loss more acutely. I assume you read his letter? Edward asked, when I'd finally gotten my thoughts together. Yes, I pulled the envelope out of my bag. I was shocked by its contents. I hadn't realized that Ben had set up a trust fund and that he'd changed his will. Edward nodded. Ben was very concerned about your future, especially after he realized the extent of your daughter's and her husband's financial problems. When exactly did he set up this fund? Almost 5 years ago. Edward opened the folder on the table in front of him. When he received the inheritance from his uncle Harold, he invested about $300,000 through an investment company I trust. At first, it was just a way to diversify your assets, but later, when he realized what was happening to Audrey and Neil's finances, he turned that investment into a closed trust fund with only you as beneficiaries. And how much is in that fund now? As of today, he checked the papers, $812,437.63. It's been a very successful investment. I almost gasped in surprise. 800,000. It was an enormous sum that I had never even known existed. And Audrey knew nothing about it? Absolutely nothing, Edward confirmed. Ben was very careful. All the documents were kept only here, in my office. He never discussed it over the phone, and he never kept any papers at home, just the envelope he left for you. What about the change of will? That happened about a year ago. Edward handed me a copy of the document. Ben had changed the wording so that the house and all the other assets went solely to you, instead of being jointly owned with Audrey as they had been. He'd also added a trust clause to formalize your right to the funds. I looked over the document. It was exactly as Edward had said. Ben had made provisions to protect me. But why hadn't he told me about it? Edward sighed. He was going to. But then the diagnosis came, and everything changed. He was afraid of upsetting you even more, adding to the fear of losing him the realization that your daughter, he hesitated, that our daughter was trying to rip us off. I finished for him. Yes, he nodded. Ben loved Audrey very much, no matter what, and it pained him to admit what she'd become. We were silent for a while, each of us absorbed in our own thoughts. There's something else you need to know, Edward said finally, pulling another folder out of his desk drawer. About 3 months ago, shortly after Ben got worse, he asked me to see if Audrey was doing anything with your property. And you discovered that she'd used the power of attorney, I guessed. That's right. He nodded. She applied to the bank to refinance your house, using the power of attorney you gave her. I warned Ben, but he was already too weak to do anything about it. He was hoping he'd have time to tell you everything, but he didn't. I felt a lump come up in my throat. And now I have a foreclosed house, a mortgage I didn't take out, and a daughter who expects me to sell the house and give her half the money. It's illegal, Edward said firmly. Using a power of attorney to enrich a trustee without the truster's knowledge is fraud. We can challenge it in court. I don't want to sue my own daughter, I sighed. I understand, he nodded. But we have other options. For example, we can revoke the power of attorney immediately and notify the bank of the fraud. If Audrey and Neil don't want the publicity, they might agree to an amicable settlement, such as taking over the mortgage, releasing you from any obligations. They won't go for that. I shook my head. They don't have the money. That's why they put a mortgage on my house. In that case, Edward took off his glasses and wiped them clean. That leaves us with the legal route. He pressed a button on his phone and asked his assistant to prepare the paperwork to revoke the power of attorney. While she's doing that, Edward continued, there's one more thing you should know. On the flash drive that Ben left you, there are audio recordings of his conversations with Audrey over the past year. He recorded them in his office when she came to ask for money. These recordings are, very revealing. Did you hear them? I asked, feeling my heart sink. Ben gave me a copy. Edward nodded. He wanted me to have everything I needed in case it went to trial. You can hear Audrey confess on the tapes that she and Neil have been scamming you for years, bilking you out of money under false pretenses. There's even a conversation where she discusses the mortgage plan. This was before you even signed the power of attorney. I felt a chill run down my spine. They planned this in advance, waiting for the right time to get control of the house. Do you have a computer? I asked, taking a flash drive out of the envelope. I'd like to hear it. Edward nodded and turned the laptop on his desk toward me. Sure. He plugged the flash drive into the port, opened the file folder, and selected the first recording. Ben's voice came through the laptop speakers. I turned on the recorder because I want to have a recording of our conversation, Audrey. Lately, I've begun to doubt your sincerity. Dad, what are you talking about? Audrey's voice sounded surprised, but not indignant, as if she had expected something like this. I'm talking about the money I've been giving you for years, about the reasons you ask for them. I don't think you've always been honest with me. Of course I've been honest. How can you doubt? Then explain this to me, Ben interrupted her. Why is it that 3 months ago you said you and Neil needed money to fix the roof, and then last week I saw pictures on Facebook of your vacation in the Bahamas? Silence. Then Audrey's voice, quieter and more cautious. We put off the renovations. Decided we needed a vacation first. Neil was on the verge of burnout. He needed a break. And the $20,000 you took out for Hugh's treatment? For his alleged spinal problems? I happened to meet his soccer coach. He said Hugh was in great shape and never missed a practice. Dad, are you following us? No, Audrey. I just finally opened my eyes. I turned off the tape. I'd had enough. It hurt too much to hear Ben's voice, especially in a conversation like this. I think I understand, I said quietly. Edward nodded understandingly. You can listen to the rest later if you want, or never. There was a knock on the door, and an assistant came in with some papers for me to sign. I quickly looked them over, a standard revocation of power of attorney, properly executed, and signed. What now? I asked, handing the papers back. Now I'll send these documents to the bank and contact Audrey. Edward said, I'll ask her to meet with me to discuss the situation. I think it would be best if the first conversation didn't involve you. There was too much risk of emotional conflict. I nodded, agreeing. The thought of seeing Audrey again after this morning's conversation was unpleasant. What should I do about the trust fund? I asked. How can I access those funds? It's all set up. Edward handed me a folder of documents and a bank card. Ben had organized everything so that all you had to do was sign the papers. The card is linked to an account that already has $50,000 in it for your immediate needs. The rest of the funds will remain in investments, generating a steady income. I took the card, feeling a strange mix of emotions: gratitude for Ben's foresight, bitterness that he hadn't shared his plans and concerns with me, anger at Audrey for her betrayal, and a strange sense of freedom. For the first time in years, I had my own money, independent of anyone else. Thank you for everything, Edward, I said, standing up. I don't know what I would have done without your help. You're welcome. He stood up too. Ben has been my friend for years. I'm glad I can help you, Ruth. He walked me to the door. I'll get in touch with you as soon as I talk to Audrey. In the meantime, try to get some rest. The last few months have been hard on you. As I left the office, I felt strangely relieved, as if the heavy load I'd been carrying without realizing it was suddenly lighter. I didn't know how this whole thing with Audrey and the house was going to end, but for the first time in a long time, I felt in control. After my visit with Edward Price, I returned to the hotel feeling a strange mixture of devastation and elation. It was as if something inside me had died, and something new was just beginning to emerge. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the map Edward had given me, a simple piece of plastic that gave me access to $50,000, enough to start a new life, a life without the constant scrutiny of Audrey, without having to indulge her endless demands. My phone rang, interrupting my musings. The number was unfamiliar, but with a local area code. Ruth Hampton speaking, I answered. Mrs. Hampton, this is Detective Summers from the Grand Junction Police Department. The voice was deep, professionally neutral. I've received a statement from Mr. Edward Price regarding possible fraud on your property. I blinked in surprise. Edward hadn't mentioned that he'd go to the police. Yes, it's my case, I confirmed. But I wasn't sure I wanted to prosecute him. I understand, ma'am, he said, his voice softening. Family matters are always complicated. But Mr. Price insisted that we at least document the incident. Could you come down to the station to testify? I sighed. Edward had obviously decided to act decisively. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was exactly the approach he needed to take to make Audrey realize the seriousness of her actions. Okay, I agreed. When do I need to be there? If you can, today, the detective replied. The sooner we get the details down, the better. We agreed on a time, and I passed out. A strange sense of unreality swept over me. Just yesterday, I was an inconsolable widow. Today, I was already testifying against my own daughter. Life changes so quickly that you barely have time to realize the changes. I decided to take a walk around town before visiting the police. Grand Junction had been my home for almost half a century, but for the past few months I had only seen the road from my house to the hospital and back. Now, pacing the familiar streets, I noticed how the city had changed. New stores had appeared, old buildings had renewed their facades. Even the people seemed different, younger, more energetic, more confident in the future. As I passed the Blue Diamond Cafe, I suddenly saw a familiar face. Alice Robbins, my old book club friend, was sitting by the window sipping something from a tall glass and reading a book. We hadn't seen each other in over a year, first because of the pandemic, then because of Ben's illness, and then our friendship had somehow faded away, as it often did when life was filled with other concerns. I hesitated for a moment, but then I pushed the door of the cafe open with determination. The bell jingled melodiously, and Alice looked up from her book. Her eyes widened, and she put the book aside and stood up. Ruth, she exclaimed, opening her arms. Oh my God, it's been so long since I've seen you. We hugged, and I felt the tension of the last few days release a little. I heard about Ben, she said quietly, pulling away. I'm so sorry, honey. I wanted to come to the funeral, but I was in Denver visiting my daughter. I didn't get back until yesterday. It's okay. I smiled weakly. Thank you for remembering us. Would you like to sit down? She pointed to a vacant chair across from me. I was just about to order something to eat. Would you like some company? I nodded, suddenly realizing that I hadn't eaten since this morning. We ordered sandwiches and coffee and talked for a while about the weather, about how the city had changed, about the new books Alice had read. Normal, meaningless conversation, but just the kind of normalcy I needed right now. Finally, Alice set the cup aside and looked at me more closely. You seem, I don't know, different. It's not just the grief. There's something else going on, isn't there? I always appreciated that insight in Alice. She saw through people, but she never judged. Yeah, I admitted. Yeah, left home. Her eyebrows shot up. What? Why? And I told her everything about Audrey's betrayal, about Ben's secret trust fund, about my upcoming visit to the police. The words poured out, unfiltered, unedited. Alice listened without interruption, only occasionally shaking her head or pressing her lips into a thin line. Jesus, Ruth, she said when I was done. I always knew Audrey was complicated, but to do this to your own mother? She's always been like that, I sighed. I just didn't want to see it. Ben spoiled her, and I let it happen. Don't blame yourself. Alice covered my hand with hers. Kids grow up to be what they choose to be, no matter what we do. You know what the weirdest thing is? I looked out the window at the people walking by. I feel a sense of relief. It's like a heavy weight I've been carrying my whole life has been lifted off my shoulders. A burden of guilt toward Audrey for not being a good enough mother, for trying to set boundaries when Ben was breaking them down. It's not weird. Alice shook her head. It's a healthy reaction. You're finally freeing yourself from a toxic relationship. I remembered how Audrey had manipulated Ben and me over the years, how she used his love and my guilt to get what she wanted. Even her decision to drop out of college was a form of manipulation. She knew Ben would support her finding herself indefinitely, and I would feel guilty for not sharing his enthusiasm. Then there were endless loans for a down payment on a house, for renovations, for the children's education. Each time Audrey would come in with a new story about how hard it was for her and Neil, how they were trying, but life was so precious. Each time Ben would say, "Of course we'll help." And each time I sensed something was wrong, but kept quiet because I didn't want to disappoint my husband or fight with my daughter. Do you remember how she reacted when you and Ben wanted to go on a cruise for your 40th anniversary? Alice asked, bringing me back to reality. I shuddered. Of course I remembered. Ben and I had been saving for this trip for a long time. A Mediterranean cruise was a dream we shared. But when we finally booked the tour, Audrey suddenly announced that Hugh was having trouble at school, that he needed a tutor, that it cost thousands of dollars, and could we please help? Ben, of course, agreed. We canceled the cruise, losing some money on the cancellation fee, and gave the rest to Audrey. A month later, she posted pictures on social media of their family vacation at Disneyland. When I asked about the tutor, she said Hugh's problems resolved themselves. Yes, I replied quietly. I remember. You don't deserve to be treated like that, Ruth, Alice said firmly. No one does. And I'm glad you finally realized it. We talked some more, and I felt the thread of our old friendship, which had seemed broken, tightening again, growing stronger. Where do you live now? Alice asked when we had paid and left the cafe. In a hotel, I answered. Hampton Inn. Ironic, isn't it? She smiled. What do you plan to do next? I don't know, I admitted. First, I'm going to take care of this mortgage thing. Then, maybe sell the house. Buy something smaller. Start a new life. You could always stay at my place, Alice suggested. Since Tom died, I've got plenty of room, and frankly, it's a little lonely. I was touched by her offer, but I shook my head. Thank you, but I need to learn to live on my own. All my life, I've been someone's daughter, someone's wife, someone's mother. It's time to just be myself. Alice nodded understandingly. I respect that decision, but know that my door is always open. We exchanged phone numbers and agreed to meet in a couple days. Then I went to the police station. Detective Summers was a middle-aged man with attentive eyes and calm manners. He listened patiently to my story, asked a few clarifying questions, and wrote everything down on the official record. "Are you sure you want to continue?" he asked me when I had finished. "This could have serious consequences for your daughter and her husband." I wondered, did I want Audrey to face criminal penalties? Number. But did I want her to realize the seriousness of her actions and their consequences? Definitely yes. I want the report to be registered, I said firmly. But before moving forward, I would like to try to settle the matter privately. The detective nodded. I understand. In that case, we will register an application, but we won't take any active action for now. We will give you time to settle. I signed the report and left the station with the feeling that I had done something important, not to punish Audrey, but to restore justice and my own dignity. Back at the hotel, I found 3 missed calls from Audrey and 1 voicemail. I listened to it with a heavy heart. "Mom," her voice sounded strained, on the verge of hysteria. "Dad's lawyer called me. What are you doing? Why did you bring him in? We could have worked this out between us. Please call me back. This is very serious." I didn't call back. Instead, I wrote a short message. "Communicate with Edward Price. He is representing my interests in this case." The phone rang almost immediately, but I didn't answer it. Let Audrey realize she could no longer manipulate me through emotional blackmail. I turned off the sound and put the phone on the nightstand. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose and determination. I needed to decide where I was going to live next. The hotel was only a temporary solution. I pulled the card Edward had given me out of my bag and went to the bank to make sure everything worked. At the bank, I was greeted with a respect and attention I hadn't expected. The manager personally checked the status of my account and confirmed that everything was in order. The account did indeed have $50,000 in it, just as Edward had said. "If you need access to the trust assets," the manager said, "you'll need to contact the management company. Their contacts are in the documents Mr. Price should have given you." I nodded. Edward had given me a folder full of information, but I hadn't had time to study it in detail yet. "By the way," the manager added, "we've received a notice from Mr. Price about possible fraud on your mortgage. Our legal department is already looking into the matter." "Thank you," I said, feeling strangely relieved that the machinery of justice had already been set in motion, even without my active participation. Leaving the bank, I decided to look at apartment listings. A hotel was a convenient temporary solution, but for the long term it was too expensive. I found a small cafe with Wi-Fi, ordered a coffee, and opened a local classifieds website on my phone. The rental prices in Grand Junction shocked me. When Ben and I had bought our house 40 years ago, this whole neighborhood had been affordable for middle-class families. Now, even a small one-bedroom apartment was being asked for what seemed like exorbitant sums. I was looking through the ads, feeling a growing despondency, when the phone rang. It was Edward Price. "Ruth, good morning." His voice sounded serious. "I've got news. I've just spoken to Audrey and her lawyer." "She has a lawyer?" I was surprised. Yes, one Jeffrey Holt. Not the most reputable lawyer in town, but quite experienced in this sort of thing. "They're offering a deal." "What kind of deal?" "Audrey's willing to admit that she acted without your knowledge and exceeded her power of attorney. She's willing to take over the mortgage payments in full and execute a deed guaranteeing that once the loan is paid off, the house will revert to your ownership. I thought about it. It sounded good, but there was something that made me wary. What did she want in return? For you to withdraw the police report and not press criminal charges. I shook my head, though Edward couldn't see it. That doesn't make sense, Edward. They don't have the money to pay the mortgage. That's why they mortgaged my house. That's what I thought too, he agreed. So I dug a little deeper. Turns out Neil had recently gotten a new job at an investment firm in Denver. A significant promotion in title and salary. They're planning a move in the coming months. And they didn't tell me about it? I felt the anger rising inside again. Even when Ben was dying, they knew they'd be moving soon, and they'd decided to mortgage our house anyway. That's right. Edward's voice sounded grim. I think their plan was to take out a mortgage, use the money for a down payment on a new house in Denver, and then either sell your house or make you pay the mortgage while they lived in the new place. I closed my eyes, trying to deal with a wave of disgust. How could Audrey do this? How could she be so calculating and heartless? What do you recommend? I finally asked. I wouldn't take them up on their offer, Edward replied. First of all, I don't believe they'll pay the mortgage honestly. Second, even if they start paying, what happens if they decide a year from now that it's too much of a burden? You'll find yourself in the same situation again. What then? We have two options, Edward said. The first is to continue with the criminal prosecution. That could have serious consequences for Audrey and Neil, including possible jail time. I shuddered. Despite everything Audrey had done, I couldn't imagine her in jail. And the other one? We can demand that they immediately pay the full amount of the mortgage from the funds they received. That's about $350,000. If they refuse, we threaten full criminal prosecution and a civil suit. That sounded more reasonable. If Neil really got a good job, they should have access to the funds, perhaps through a loan or an advance from a new employer. Let's try the second option, I decided. But on one condition. I want Audrey to personally acknowledge what she's done, not through lawyers and legal documents, but by looking me in the eye. That might be emotionally difficult for you, Ruth, Edward warned me. I know, I replied, but I need this to move on. Okay, he agreed after a pause. I'll arrange a meeting, but I insist that it take place in my office with their lawyer present and possibly Detective Summers as a witness. I agreed, and we arranged a meeting for the next day. After the call, I went back to looking at apartment listings, but without the same enthusiasm. The thought of meeting Audrey was unsettling and uncomfortable, but I knew it was a necessary step. Suddenly, I remembered my conversation with Alice and her offer to stay with her. Maybe that wouldn't be such a bad idea. Not permanently, of course, but for a while I decide what to do next. I dialed her number and she answered after the second ring. Alice, it's Ruth, I said. Do you remember when you offered me a place to stay? Is that offer still on the table? Of course. She sounded happy. You could come over tonight. The guest room is always ready. We agreed that I would move in tomorrow after I met Audrey. As I hung up the phone, I felt the little knot of anxiety inside me loosen a little. There was something comforting about the thought that I'd be living in a friend's house instead of a faceless hotel or rental apartment. I spent the rest of the day walking around the city and thinking about the future. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could actually choose my path, rather than just reacting to circumstances or indulging the desires of others. In the evening, back at the hotel, I decided to listen to the recordings on the flash drive Ben had left behind. I plugged it into my phone through an adapter and opened the first file. What I heard broke my heart once again. Ben's voice, tired and frustrated, and Audrey's voice, then pleading, then manipulative, then threatening. Their conversations revealed years of lies and deceit. Audrey admitted that many of the crises for which they asked for money were either greatly exaggerated or completely made up. Neil and I are living beyond our means, Daddy, she said in one of the entries. But we can't stop. What will people think if we suddenly start saving money? If we pulled our kids out of private school? If we give up our country club membership? What will people think if they find out you're living on your aging parents' money? Ben asked. Audrey laughed. They'll never find out. No one knows we take money from you. Everyone thinks Neil is a successful investor. In the last entry, dated just a week before Ben's hospitalization, Audrey openly discussed the plan with the mortgage. I need power of attorney, Dad, she said, so I can help with the bills and paperwork while you and Mom take care of your treatment. Why? Ben's voice sounded suspicious. Ruth is doing just fine on her own. Mom is wearing herself out sitting with you in the hospital. She needs the help. Besides, what's the big deal? It's just a formality so I can act on your behalf if I need to. And what exactly might you need? Silence then. Nothing specific. Just little things. Better to have that option than to have to run afterward for your signatures. Now I understood why Ben had changed his will and set up a trust fund. He'd seen through Audrey's plans and tried to protect me even when he already knew he was dying. I turned off the tape, feeling strangely empty. I was going to have to face Audrey tomorrow, knowing all of this, knowing how calculated her betrayal had been. But for the first time in a long time, I felt no fear of this meeting, only a determination to end this painful episode and start a new chapter of my life, a life where I would come first, not somewhere at the bottom of a long list of priorities. The morning of my meeting with Audrey was unexpectedly clear. I looked out the hotel window at the blue sky and bright sunshine, thinking about how the weather often contrasts with our inner state. A storm of emotions raged inside me: anger, frustration, sadness, but also a strange anticipation for the ending of this story. I wore the strict black suit I'd bought for Ben's funeral. It was a kind of symbolic choice. I was saying goodbye not only to my husband, but also to my daughter, to my old life, to my old self. I put my hair in a neat bun, applied minimal makeup, and wore simple pearl earrings, a gift from Ben for our 20th anniversary. I arrived at Edward Price's office 15 minutes before the appointed time. His secretary, the same young woman who'd greeted me the last time I'd been there, ushered me into a small conference room where Edward was waiting. Ruth, he stood up to greet me. How are you feeling? Ready for this conversation, I answered. And it was true. I'd been through so much of an emotional roller coaster in the last few days that I felt strangely calm right now. Are they here yet? Waiting in the waiting room, Edward nodded. I told Mary to ask them to wait until we were ready. I wanted to make sure you had time to gather your thoughts. I appreciated his concern. Edward turned out to be not just a competent lawyer, but a genuinely nice man who understood the emotional complexity of the situation. Detective Summers is here too, he added, waiting in my office. He's agreed to be present as a witness, but won't get involved unless we ask him to. I nodded. I'm ready. Let's get started. Edward pressed a button on the phone and asked Mary to invite the others. A minute later, the door opened, and Audrey, Neil, and a man in his 50s in an expensive suit I didn't know, obviously their lawyer. Detective Summers followed, nodding to me and sitting down in the corner of the room, ostentatiously pulling out a notebook. Audrey looked pale and gaunt. Her usually flawless makeup was applied as if in a hurry, and her hair wasn't as carefully styled as usual. Neil, on the other hand, remained coolly calm, but I noticed him fidgeting nervously with his wedding ring, a gesture that always gave away his tension. Have a seat, Edward pointed to the chairs across from us. I think everyone knows why we're here. Audrey and Neil's lawyer, Jeffrey Holt, as he introduced himself, nodded and pulled out a file folder. My clients are ready to settle, he began. As I've discussed with you, Mr. Price, they acknowledge that they acted. No, I raised my hand to stop him. Before we start discussing the legal details, I want to hear from Audrey. Personally? Why, Audrey? Why did you do this to me? Audrey looked at her lawyer as if looking for support, but he only shrugged slightly. The decision was hers. She shifted her gaze to me and swallowed. Mom, she stammered. We were in desperate straits. Debts, mortgage, kids' school. Don't lie, I said quietly but firmly. I heard the tapes, Audrey. Ben has been recording your conversations for the last year. I know a lot of these crises were made up. I know about Neil's new job in Denver. I know everything. Her eyes widened with shock. She threw a quick glance at Neil, who looked equally shocked. Dad was recording our conversations? Her voice trembled. Yes. Edward nodded. And those recordings are legal evidence in Colorado because Mr. Hampton was a party to those conversations and clearly communicated the fact of the recording at the beginning of each conversation. Audrey turned even paler. Neil straightened up in his chair, his face turning into a stone mask. What recordings? He asked, turning to his lawyer. We didn't know anything about the records. Jeffrey Holt looked concerned. Mr. Price, this is the first time I've heard of any records. I need to familiarize myself with them before we go any further. Of course. Edward pulled a flash drive out of his breast pocket. Here's a copy, but I have to warn you, there's over 5 hours of material on it. If you insist on listening to it before we continue, we'll have to reschedule. Neil whispered something to his lawyer, and he frowned. We're ready to proceed, he said after a brief client conference. But I'd like to note that I accept these records with the caveat of possibly challenging their admissibility at a later date. Noted, Edward nodded. Now, back to Mrs. Hampton's question. Audrey, why did you decide to mortgage your mother's house without her knowledge? Audrey looked cornered. She cast another glance at Neil, but he was staring straight ahead, not supporting her in any way. Okay, she finally said. The truth was, yes, we were in debt, but not because of the kids' school or medical bills. Neil had made some bad investments, and we'd lost almost everything. Our house was mortgaged to the max, credit cards maxed out. And instead of honestly asking for help, you decided to trick me. I tried to keep my voice steady. I knew you'd say no, Audrey exclaimed suddenly, her face contorted with anger. You've always been against helping us. You always thought we were living beyond our means, that we should save money like you and Daddy. But times have changed, Mom. You can't live like you did. It's not about lifestyle, Audrey. I shook my head. It's about honesty. You could have asked. I could have said no. It's a normal, healthy relationship between adults. But you chose to cheat and steal. I didn't steal. She was practically screaming. I just took something that would have been mine when you died anyway. There was a heavy silence in the room. Even Audrey's lawyer looked shocked by her words. Now we're getting to the point, I said quietly. You see me as an obstacle between you and my money, my possessions, my life. Audrey realized what she'd said and tried to correct herself. That's not what I meant, Mom. No, that's exactly what you meant, Edward interrupted her. And that's why Benjamin changed his will to disinherit you, Audrey. He saw what you'd become. What? Now she looked truly shocked. Dad disinherited me? Not completely, Edward clarified. But he changed the terms so that the house and the main assets go to your mother alone, not jointly owned as they had been. He's also set up a trust fund that you didn't know about and that you don't have access to. Neil showed emotion for the first time in the entire meeting. His face contorted with rage. He couldn't have done that. We are relatives. We have rights. In Colorado, a man has every right to dispose of his property as he sees fit. Edward replied calmly. Benjamin was in his right mind when he made these changes. 2 witnesses and a notary will attest to that. Audrey looked like she'd been hit. She turned to me. Did you know about this all this time? No, I shook my head. I didn't find out until after he was dead. Ben had protected me without even telling me what he was protecting me from. There was another pause. Then Audrey's lawyer cleared his throat. I think we should revisit the settlement issue. In light of new information, my clients are willing to admit that they acted wrongfully. They've agreed to pay the full amount of the mortgage and release all claims on Mrs. Hampton's house. And where did they get the money from all of a sudden? Edward asked. Neil answered reluctantly, I got a raise from the new company. I was supposed to use it for a down payment on a house in Denver, but he stopped talking, obviously unwilling. He was silent, obviously unwilling to admit that he had planned to use the money from the mortgage on Ruth's house. We agree, Edward said, looking at me and getting my nod, but with a few conditions. First, the full amount must be paid within 7 days. Second, Mr. and Mrs. Frostwick will sign a document stating that they do not and will not have any claim to Mrs. Hampton's property. Third, they will apologize in writing for their actions. Apologize? Neil was outraged. We've already agreed to return the money. What more do you want? Accountability, I said, looking directly at my daughter. I want you to realize what you've done, Audrey, not just to the house, but to our whole family, with a relationship that should have been based on love and trust, not manipulation and lies. Audrey lowered her eyes. For a moment, I thought I saw a glimmer of remorse in her, but it quickly disappeared behind a mask of resentment. Okay, she said finally, we'll write an apology. If all the conditions are met, Edward continued, Mrs. Hampton will agree not to press criminal charges. But, he paused, if any of the conditions are not met, or if there are any future attempts to contest the will or gain control of Mrs. Hampton's estate, we will immediately contact the prosecutor's office. Detective Summers coughed from his corner. I can confirm that a fraud allegation has been registered and is in the works. The decision to suspend the investigation can be reviewed at any time. Audrey's lawyer quickly assured everyone that his clients fully understood the terms and conditions and were willing to abide by them. We spent another half-hour discussing details and signing preliminary documents. It was agreed that the final agreement would be signed a week later, when Audrey and Neil would provide the funds to pay off the mortgage. When the formal part of the meeting was over, I asked everyone except Audrey to leave the room. I needed to say something to her in private. Edward looked worried. Are you sure, Ruth? Yes, I nodded. It's private. When everyone left, Audrey and I sat on opposite sides of the table, looking at each other. She looked wary, as if she were expecting another blow. I'm selling the house, I said simply. What? She looked genuinely surprised. But we're getting the money back. The house will be debt-free. It's not about the money, Audrey. I don't want to live in that house anymore. There are too many memories, good and bad. I want to start a new life. But, this is our family home, she objected. Where I grew up, where we were happy. Were we? I looked at her sadly. I think you were only happy when you got what you wanted. And me, I've spent too long living other people's wishes instead of my own. Where will you go? She asked, a note of genuine concern in her voice. I'm going to stay with Alice Robbins, remember her? My friend from the book club. And then, I have options. You could come live with us, Audrey suddenly suggested. In Denver, we'd have a big house, plenty of room for everyone. The kids would be happy to see Grandma more often. I smiled for the first time since we'd met. Thank you, but no. I think we both need space and time. A lot of time. You? You're still mad at me. It wasn't a question. No, Audrey. I shook my head. I'm not mad at you. I just don't trust you anymore. And I'm not sure I'll ever trust you again. She flinched as if in physical pain. Mom, I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But I'm your daughter. Are you really ready to just give up on me? I'm not giving up on you, I said softly. I'm just setting boundaries, something I should have done years ago. Maybe if I had been stricter with you, if I hadn't let you always get what you wanted, you would have grown up to be a different person. So you blame yourself for the way I am? There was a bitterness in her voice. Partly, I admitted. But at the end of the day, we all make choices, Audrey. You made yours. Now I'm making mine. We stared at each other for a long minute. Then I stood up. Goodbye, Audrey. I hope things work out well for you in Denver. Is this really goodbye? Her voice trembled. We won't see each other again? I don't know, I answered honestly. Time will tell, but right now, I need distance. From you, from Neil, from everything you represent in my life. I walked out of the room without looking back. Edward was waiting for me in the hallway, his face a look of concern. Is everything okay? He asked. Yes, I nodded. Everything was finally okay. 3 months later, I stood on the porch of my new home, a small but cozy cottage on Grand Mesa Lake. I'd decided to see this house Ben had written about in his last letter after all, and I'd fallen in love with it at first sight. It was exactly as Ben had described it, simple but solid, with a porch and a view of the lake, surrounded by pine trees. The sale of the townhouse brought in more money than I expected. The real estate market in Grand Junction was really booming. Along with the trust fund money, I now had a financial cushion that many could only dream of. Audrey and Neil kept their word. They paid the mortgage in full and signed all the necessary paperwork. Their written apology was formal and cold, but I didn't expect sincere remorse. They moved to Denver as planned, and I haven't heard from them since. Alice visited me often in my new home. We had reestablished our friendship and now had a small book club every week just for the two of us. Sometimes other friends joined us, both old friends with whom I'd reestablished contact and new ones I'd met here at the lake. I began writing a memoir, not for publication, but for myself. The process was unexpectedly therapeutic. I remembered my life with Ben, our happy and difficult times, Audrey's birth and upbringing, all the little moments that add up to a big life. Sometimes I thought about Audrey and the grandchildren. Did I miss them? Yes, especially the kids. But I knew I had done the right thing by putting distance. Some relationships are too toxic to maintain, even if it's with the people closest to you. One day I got a letter from Lillian, my granddaughter. She wrote that she missed me, that she would like to come visit. Her letter was sincere and warm, without any of the manipulation I had learned to recognize in her mother's words. I replied that I would be happy to see her, but just her alone, without her parents. Lillian arrived the following weekend. She was 15 and surprisingly mature for her age. We talked about everything, her school, her friends, her dreams, Ben, our family. She didn't mention the fight between me and her parents, and I didn't ask. It was a silent pact between us to focus on our own connection, not the family drama. When she left, I hugged her and promised her that my doors would always be open to her. Not for Audrey or Neil, at least not now, but for her and Hugh, if he wanted to come too. Standing on the porch of my new house, looking out at the sunset over the lake, I thought about the strange irony of life. I had lost my husband and, in a way, my daughter. But I had found myself. After 67 years of living, I finally felt whole, able to make my own decisions, to go my own way. In my jacket pocket, I fumbled for a small box of Ben's cufflinks, the simple silver cufflinks with his initials that he wore almost every day. I decided to leave them here, in this house he'd bought for us, dreaming of a future that never came. It was my way of telling him that I was here, that I had found the peace he desired for me. The sun was sinking below the horizon, coloring the waters of the lake with gold and red tones. The new day was over, but there were many more days ahead. My own days, filled with my own decisions and choices. I smiled at the thought and walked into the house, closing the door behind me.